Aloha familia, welcome to this broadcast coming to you live from the beautiful mountains of Boulder, Colorado. We're up at Star House Property. I'm Kevin Orosz. This is the Re-Evolution podcast broadcast, and we are joined by the whole squad here. The whole squad. Let's do a little round of names. How about that?
Sure.
Let's do it.
My name is Marc Angelo, involved in a bunch of amazing things up here in the mountains of Boulder, Colorado, but I'm super excited to be here.
Nice.
Aloka, also known as Luke Kohen, just moved here to Boulder, supporting the stabilization of some pretty epic convergences.
Garret, just finishing up a stint here in Boulder. I found a bunch of tribe, and I'm going to miss it here, heading back to the East Coast, and one who helps tell and distributes stories across the interwebs.
I'm Nguyen. Just returned back to Denver, so Denver's come back to me. And I help sort of conscious entrepreneurs leverage their finances.
We've already got some themes here, gentlemen, that are present in our reality. I want to speak to two here. One is this kind of exodus happening and caravan that's heading to Boulder, because we've all found ourselves here in part due to Paul Cooper. Shout out to the Light Leadership team. And the conscious entrepreneurship and this mythology that I've been in and co-creating this year when I met all y'all in Costa Rica, and there's been a trajectory since then. We were just speaking in an episode before this about how the Superior Academy Mastermind fractaled into Collective Legacy, which Aloka spearheaded, and now we're at a new phase or a new resonance where this mythology or this shared reality we're creating is, I think it's pregnant. It's really pregnant right now.
Just wanted a quick shout out to David Weber and Ali Shanti for also being a massive catalyst to the Boulder Exodus and superhero collective legacy Boulder train route that has emerged.
Totally. So I guess let's do this emergent style, true light leadership style. What does anyone have a heartbeat or a present theme right now that we feel like is really important to presence in this mythology that we're in?
I think one of the overarching themes that comes with maybe the work that we're doing is that we're finding a way to relate more with one another and trust one another more, and to trust in building a movement of sorts. I think one of the biggest things and the forces that we're observing coming to life right now is the force of what I would call a collective flag. So it goes beyond brand, right? Superior Academy is a brand, and I steward this brand as a way to leverage its credibility to then build some of these masterminds in different pieces. But really the ultimate vision is not to build a bigger company so much as it is to build a real community, a real tribe, and some shared collective values that we can rally around. And my goal personally is less about being the culture maker, as we're more so than being somebody who's willing to start playing some drum beats in the background and then see who else joins in and what beat emerges, let's say.
Yeah, there's something really cool in our collective community of the gifts and the keys that each person contributes to the emergent culture, and how as we meet in these deeper connections and forge these relationships, we were kind of talking earlier of the bottom up approach and top down, and they're kind of meeting at the heart, and also the qualitative and the quantitative where that overlaps. And so part of this this desire to make beautiful impact in the world, and also build relationships that can endure and last as the movement fortifies and scales, that everyone is finding their groove and their highest excitement and where their gifts can contribute to something. So that drum call for people to join the circle, and how that circle can discover the best decision-making processes and best practices and other ways to be in communion, to be in community.
Yes. And there's community being communication and unity alchemized in a way. We're witnessing here, what I was witnessing was a little more of the social, cultural, and conflict resolution, coming into actual coherence. Because I know you, Marc, you've worked a lot in scaling the models, the business structure, and also planting the flag of the events. So like that was like a big catalyst point. And then Aloka, I know you at Collective Legacy, the mythology was like bridging indigenous with this like entrepreneur culture, as well as like taking the mindset, which is quite valuable, of 7 generations out, like not going for short-term profit, not going for short-term projects, but we're really creating a spaceship that can sustain across time and is scalable, and creates like a plug-and-play community for our other brothers and sisters that may not be with us yet, but they are actually perfect fits for this culture.
There's so much value that so many beings can contribute. We're looking at the seeds of what I think is planetary culture. You know, there's enough shared values across so many demographics. They just haven't had time to come into a relationship yet to unpack what those shared values are yet. And so, you know, living in a world where there's so much clash and duality and separation, you know, something that is always burning in my heart is how do we get more people to collaborate than ever, because that's actually what we need in order to bring this higher pattern into a shared reality for humanity, and where those collaborations are essential, and what that collaborative process does to initiate each individual to step into a place of deeper listening, having to look at themselves. Like there's so much value created through collaboration, and I think there's been old ways of collaborating that have been detrimental and can like negatively impact businesses, and I think there's collaboration that's been kind of codependent in the hippie movement and the eco-village movement that like also like didn't allow something to stabilize. And like what our tribe is doing, I think, is figuring out like how we can have both the stabilized, scalable business element that's contributing value in so many ways, not just financially, but through systems that actually ignite even more collaboration, and then the qualitative like relational element where, you know, the personal relationships aren't sacrificed at for profit or for scalability, like that people can all actually get an algorithm of growing together as souls.
Wow. So I guess a question I'll pose to this council here is, you know, what seems to be, I like to organize my mind this way, like what seems to be the lead domino, seed crystal, or leverage point, or one thing, like the focus question, right? What is the one thing that, if focused on, makes everything else easier or unnecessary within this field and mythology we're speaking to?
Well, I know that for me that's organization, and for me that's actually just empowering and encouraging, seeing each person's unique gifts and seeing how that can be best aligned. And the more organized we are, I mean, if you look at like any big government, any big military, they're just so well organized that they can deploy at the drop of a dime. And if we can actually come from a heart-centered place and actually create the world that we want to see on a sustainable level, on a social level, on an economical level, and organize, we have all the answers. Now we just have to piece them together.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to, we organize by realizing that we don't need to all try and do everything individually. Right?
It's just it's not fun.
No, it's just not, right? Like, not everybody wants to run a funnel. Not everyone wants to be the medicine man either. You know what I mean? And not everyone wants to be the yogi. We all have these different codes that we want to bring to the table. And if we focus on what we are a genius at, more so than just what we're capable of, then we actually feel more happy, more happiness through us living our genius and living our highest excitement and purpose. And that can shift and change. It's not to say like, oh, you were the yogi, so now you have to be the yogi forever. Yeah, it can shift and it changes, and it will naturally emerge over time, right? Like those different pieces. But nonetheless, without a doubt, we do have these common threads that, you know, we tend to call careers or jobs or whatever it is that we could bring to the table in service of a greater collective good. The challenge with that is that we created a culture where we actually we valued our decentralization and our like sovereignty so powerfully that it actually started to erode the other power that we had, which was our unity. Right? So how do we step into further sovereignty while not eroding our unity, our actual community?
How do we step into sovereign unity?
Exactly. Exactly what I was going to end with. But yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, and that's that's possible, but we, I think we almost like lost the path on how to do that, particularly when like we see so much reward and so much championing in our culture of the individual, right? Like, how many people can name another person who runs Tesla? Like, any one person who works in Tesla, how many people could actually name that?
Right.
Yet, so many people love it. So many people love Elon, and we champion this one person. Now, is he a brilliant person who deserves praise? Sure, right? And there's so many other people that make that possible, and we need to find a way to kind of show the unseen. Because I think that that's a part of this is the problem, this is the erosion that we have, is that we have a short-term mindset, and we're part of an ism. Capitalism, monetarism, socialism, communism are all part of the same general philosophy, which is that we are approaching our reality from the world's biggest religion, which is money, in a scarcity model. And that scarcity model means that we need to compete versus collaborate. We need to win the race versus win together. And that fundamentally creates this spiral that divides us, that sometimes empowers us through decentralization as well, like the internet empowered tons of people, of course. Blockchain, all these things can empower. But then it's like, oh, we have this solution, Bitcoin, or this kind of technology. Great. Then it becomes a race from what is it, like 2,000 different tokens that launch in a couple of years, like, and now everyone's just doing this thing, and now all of a sudden the value of all of them has eroded. Whereas had we followed, and I'm not trying to say Bitcoin or any one of them, but if we rallied around a couple of them a little bit more, it would be more powerful. The same would be true, and let's just remove blockchain out of the equation. Google is really powerful as a source of information for us, because many people use this centralized intelligence that we have all tapped into, which is Google, right? And so inherently, every time more information ends up on Google, it becomes more and more valuable. The data becomes more and more valuable to every single person in the network, but there is still a centralized force. Now, is Google perfect? Of course not, right? And so the question is, well, how do you balance the centralization, the need for centralization, the power that comes with that, with the inherent flaw of centralization, which is corruption, monopolies,
power over hierarchy, like being like prevalent. I mean, what I'm hearing you say, and this is like really fascinating, is we're like touching on like Buckminster Fuller and the global village and the emergence of like a true planetary culture. And we're speaking to like the postmodernist agenda, which I've actually been studying a lot this year, which is deconstructing hierarchy and replacing it. And like one of the old mythologies was in the individualist. So like the power of the individual raised to a hero status, not like good kind of hero, right? The oil tycoon who's just like, I control all the resources and I'm gonna like deify myself through finance and capitalism. And now what we're seeing is like a decentralized version of that, but not so decentralized that we're not in connection. Where each person is celebrated for their genius and their unique gift to the collective. And now it's like, how do we plug in together to resurrect the village?
Yes, I have a friend in Jamaica who created a shared published book, contributing authors, called Reinhabiting the Village. And that's a theme. Resurrecting the village, reinhabiting the village is a great theme for this, of how do we invite participation in a shared culture that is in true connection with Earth, true connection with individuals, has these value systems that are not riddled by ideology, but are truly functional and allow enough neutrality for different demographics of people to actually meet in understanding. Because understanding is what's missing. That's what polarizes people. There's a lack of understanding, there's a lack of empathy, there's a lack of connection, that we make assumptions about another demographic and miss where there is shared meaning, or where there is shared narratives that we can actually find the win-win-win. So I think the gift of coming into Synarchy, or the gift of what you're talking about, of how we work as a cohesive whole, by having like a strong individuated sovereign being holding its place within the circle. It won't work if someone's haven't claimed themselves within this iteration of the narrative. The balance of having strong individuals that are truly aware that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. But what I think is really powerful is when that stabilizes the opportunities of having shared understanding, and how that can, so much more impact can be created from that. Then we know where to put our energy, where to, what we want to vote with our dollar with, all these things, where we can unpack enough of that win-win-win to really collaborate.
Yes, yes, and this is an informing principle as well. As the economic, social, ideological crisis mounts on the planet, where like there's a lot of people, and the mainstream media is a good place to get a pulse on this, that they're lost. There's no mythology guiding their action, and what you're speaking to, individuated powerhouses that know they're in connection and contribution, that collective field informs the next step for business, for living, for what relationships are prioritized, and to borrow from Ali Shanti, time, energy, attention, and money, which are the most valuable resources on the planet. You know, and all of that, I should say, invoking the planet, Gaia, the Gaia intelligence, that is actually in line with the earth, which is also undergoing rapid changes right now. And
that's at the core of all of it, I think, from my perspective, is she's igniting and inviting us to actually come into communion with her again. And so much of the culture came into separation. And now it's like, as we enter back into connection, it's not like, you know, it's like avoiding some of the extremes. Like either we're living in huts and there's no technology, or we're in this like crazy singularity matrix, like, you know, potentiality. What's the integrated wholeness is that our technologies are actually in biomimicry. They're actually serving the collaboration, the connection, the shared values. It's not one or the other. So like, I mean, there's so many themes from finances to technology here to culture. I mean, this is really some of the growth edges of our shared timeline, our shared narrative right now.
yes,
I mean, sexuality. Oh, we can throw a million topics out there, but they're all part of our evolutionary process right now, because I think that humanity is ready to be in connection again with the earth.
yes,
And if we're not, we're fucked. And so there's pretty much an opportunity to discover what that looks like for each individual. Like, what does that look like locally? What does that look like regionally? What does that look like globally? That there's, I think, our shared culture at the core is the environment, is Earth. That's the foundation. And so if we're making decisions that's not including her or being informed by her, then we're actually out of alignment with that new narrative. That's inviting all of us to collaborate, because we can rally around her and in connection to her.
yes, yes. And this is something we're talking about in the last episode, of hosting events, bringing in powerful people in tech, influence, finance, to eco-villages that are designed to be in connection with nature, and then masterminding and hearting around these solutions that nature is abundantly providing solutions. It's like we're not like in poverty of solutions to some of the big problems. Like there's like 20 for each problem. And man, like I want to live in a world, and I want my children and their children to live in a world where I can be on an eco-village with lightning speed satellite Wi-Fi, eating the best superfoods,
grown
on the land in connection. And like next weekend, you know, at the eco-village, we have investors from Dubai and like, you know, Chinese like diplomats like visiting us, and we're the global village is returning. And it's not that we have to live, you know, this was something that came up in Light Leadership. Again, shout out to Paul Cooper. You know, he was leading a meditation. Like, can you imagine an earth without trauma? Can you imagine an earth where we have returned to a sort of paradisical nirvana connection with nature state? And the point was put forward, like, isn't this naive? Like, this is how a lot of the indigenous lived before colonization impacted them and the violence was done. And I think, no, it's not. Because we're not going to go back to huts. You know, this was an urge in the 60s. Let's just get on some land, man, and like grow ganja and like, yeah, fuck the man. It's like, that didn't work at all.
There's a higher pattern coming online. I really like what Garret's saying about organization. Like, I'm curious, because I feel like you're tracking the narrative really well, Kevin, and you're giving like these really, like, it's like something's gelling. You're like helping gel what we're all sharing. But I'd be curious to hear a little more around like your perspective on like seeing the contrasts within some of that, around like the difference between like showing up to like a conference room in a hotel versus like being on a land. And like, 'cause I know that you guys go to a lot of these other kind of, like, I kind of avoid some of those sometimes. And how, like, I just love to hear from some of your personal experiences, like the difference that you're noticing and what possibilities of like what kind of technologies and what kind of organizational structures will allow it to not be like hippy dippy, like check out of connection with the world, because the world's bad, but like actually meet the world and create invitations and start to inform the world from this emergent place.
Yes.
And introduce systems that work for everybody.
Yeah, just speak about that a little bit. I mean, it's really kind of reshifting the story, and like what we like to say is making sustainability sexy. And like the first way we can do that is to get culture there, is to bring influencers, to bring the people who are gonna like. That's why like high-speed internet is so important to have at these places, so you can actually bring the digital nomads that are gonna come there, actually get your Facebook ads set up, actually have your videos going, actually having the people like taking the pictures, as opposed to just lifting up the world stars of the world and like just like the fight videos or just like the fail videos, which is like fail videos are kind of funny every now and then, but also like turning around and like lifting permaculture up and showing the beauty behind it and showing like that this is something that we want to get behind. And that's like the first step of it, and also just like realizing each individual's powers. And that just, you don't go to an eco-village just to like just learn permaculture.
Or just to escape the world.
Just to escape the world, yeah. Then you can find community and tribe there, and you can play a role, and you can be empowered in that way, and it's not about totally dropping off, but you can have those luxuries at the same time, and it's just about using the technology that we have so we can have that level of comfort, and the world that I can like picture in my own mind is one that's fully self-sustaining on a local level, but also just integrated, and there's peace on a global scale as well. So we can have these communications, we can learn from each other, but at the same time we can self-sustain, and we can have that fulfillment, we can have that community, we can have that tribe on a smaller level as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that really goes back to what we're trying to do with the masterminds and kind of like coming to these eco-villages and lifting them up and like showing people that this is already happening.
Yeah.
And that those conversations you're having in forums or those daydreams that you're kind of like not paying attention in class and you're thinking about that is actually happening. And that people are having an awesome time doing such, and it doesn't have to be this secret. That there is so much land out there, there's so much opportunity, and you don't have to rally around your friends and buy your own piece of land. And like I've started a community in Vermont, and there's a lot to learn within it, and it was like a great learning experience, and we're still growing that, but also at the same time we need more people who are actually showing up and who are kind of like shedding the ego a little bit and knowing that the most valuable thing that they can do for themselves and the world at large is to plug in and to see and to have their own perspective within it, as opposed to like going at it alone or falling in and just kind of like jumping into whatever narrative is already being told. But to come in there, feel empowered, know your spot, and that also has to do with the tribe and the council of those communities as well. How do we welcome people in? How do we have that onboarding process? And I like to think in terms of blueprints is kind of like, what does that look like? How can we have that communication? How can we have those systems in place so that it's seamless and that it's open source so more people can do it?
And the fastest way to start with those things is to move from the most renewable resources to the least renewable resources. So the least renewable resources, it sounds crazy, is actually our planet. And I mean by that is our planet is renewable in nature, but it is finite to some degree in the sense that there's only so much land and so many rocks and so many molecules of anything, right? There's a certain limit of molecules, let's say, and it's not to say that we won't go mine them from asteroids at some point, but the more renewable resource is like our attention, right? We get to click and vote with our dollar, but we also get to vote with our attention, with our likes, with our comments. So if we could build systems that from there, from the most renewable, like constantly happening all the time, and move that energy and attention, time, energy, attention, and money, or I would rather say the word resource, towards these longer term visions that are land-based, planting the best time to have planted a tree was 25 years ago, the next best time is today. How do we take these renewable resources and allow them to empower us and inform us as to making decisions that go into the, I don't want to say non-renewable, but the slower patterns that nature observes, right? Yes. It takes many, many, many years for an ecosystem to form, and it takes minutes for it to destroy, in the wrong way, unfortunately. And so if we can know that our culture and our attention is in that more renewable space, then we can start moving that needle a little bit forward. But it's challenging because you know what? More and more people are spending more and more time on cell phones. More and more people are spending more and more time on the internet. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, when they're on their internet, they're spending less time potentially consuming other more physical resources, right? And at the exact same time, they're less likely to be involved in the thing because they're just watching it. And so we've created this weird like loop where we're watching we're like watching our self-destruction
Yes.
on live stream, like literally, like, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not trying to say this is doing that. I'm just trying to say, like, it's kind of weird that we have this, like, we're so self-aware, but we aren't yet aware enough of how we move from being the caterpillar to being the butterfly. And that's the whole, like, Imaginal Cells thing, right? Like, this is a kind of theme, and shout out to David Weber on this, speaks a lot about this, but the idea that, in fact, there is no part of the caterpillar and the cells that are within the caterpillar that really actually informs how the caterpillar will turn into the butterfly.
Right.
And it's these imaginal cells, essentially, in the mythos of this, is that these cells literally, in a sense, pop out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden take over the existing culture and create an entirely new sequence of existence within that organism that now literally went from, like, the slowest, fuzziest little thing that crawls super slow to now this
40 times its weight.
Right.
It's
It's destroying the environment.
to actually pollinating and contributing to the ecosystem.
Exactly. And
You're speaking to, like, really deep themes in the evolution of consciousness, and I might butcher his name, but Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Chardin, yeah, French monk. He invokes the noosphere, which is what you're talking about, which is like, it's like the atmosphere, but of the mind.
Yep.
And so as the internet comes online, and even though it may seem that, like, people are dumber than ever, actually, like, ancient wisdom is now in play. You know, I say that with love and light.
Yeah.
Ancient wisdom is now in play with technology,
Yep.
which is like the nervous system of humanity. And so actually what you're describing, and I'm getting spirit bumps, is like, there's more attention and consciousness energy available on the planet. And therefore, if it's directed in the right way, it can actually renew everything. Like, all of the seeming, like, the carbon crisis and, like, fossil fuels, like, they're actually small problems in the face of massive focused attention and consciousness. And I believe, you know, while some people might be streaming Kim Kardashian, I invoke being an imaginal cell, and I know we're all imaginal agents that are providing a counter stream to help co-opt the attention and consciousness of the planet and direct it into the places where it can have the most effect.
What's cool when the imaginal cells come online within the caterpillar is that they actually start to cluster. This is kind of what we're talking about, coming into circle, coming into connection, that there's enough shared meaning and shared narrative and value systems that we're coming into collaboration. So that clustering is already happening. And it's probably happening regionally in other places with other influences that we haven't even met yet or even aware of. That there'll be a critical mass of when we're all introduced to each other. That next level, that higher pattern, that other ecosystems is already, you know, crystallizing. It's already coming online. And so there's, like, the exponential change rate, that novelty that Terrance Kennedy's talking about, is so apparent to me right now, like, more than it's ever been, and it's scary and exciting at the same time, depending on how you give your energy. So there's all these different potential outcomes that can happen, right? And so a lot of people go into fear around certain conspiratorial ideas, or fear around what's going to happen to our environment, or fear what's, you know, some of the ideas like we got to go to Mars, or what all these different,
Gotta get out of here.
all these other ideas that are become, you know, memes in the collective, which then direct energy, right? So, you know, they talk about Third World War would be a war on consciousness, would be a war of ideology. And so I think as Imaginal Cells, we have a sacred responsibility of finding something neutral and clear enough that isn't like harvesting consciousness, but contributing to consciousness, so that it's good to be aware of those other potential outcomes. And the key word is to be aware, not beware.
Yes.
Right? And not go into fear. So I think, you know, the gift of the Imaginal Cell is that we're bringing a quality of integrated love and commitment that I'd like to see stabilize into a kind of incorruptibility. And that in that incorruptibility, then like the caterpillar cells that are trying to kill the Imaginal Cells, you know, they get integrated, and it becomes part of the whole. And I think this is what, you know, a lot of you know, nations and regions and cultures that are you know, thriving on hate, or thriving on fear, or thriving on all these themes, and creating a distortion of unity through actually an ideology of separation. When that alchemizes, the ability to tap into the shared meaning and reality that we are all interconnected, and that we are part of nature, and that we're interconnected in nature, I think will become more of a norm and not as an ideology, but as a felt reality in our beings. And so I don't know why, I just got guided to like kind of talk about fear on our planet. And I know like everyone in this room is so committed to like meeting that fear with love and solutions and shifting the narrative of the planet that we can still create. There's still a window of opportunity.
There's still time, and this is to Invoke Terrance again. He's like one of the key teachings in Taoism is like the constant nature of reality is change, and in these times of like cascading exponential change, like the anxiety can build really quickly, and like one of your goals, and all the tools are available now. Yoga, meditation, the ancient sciences and technologies are fully available, is to lower the anxiety enough so you can participate in the emergence. Because the fear has a way of locking people down. And, I would hope that you listen to this stream or podcast or video over like Fox News, because this has as an element of inspiration and breathing solution and evolution into your consciousness, instead of just looking at, when a birth is happening, there's a nightmarish aspect to it where there's a lot of blood and sweat and screaming, and it's like, fuck, what's going on here? It's like, well, we're birthing a new planetary culture. It's not all rainbows and butterflies. Like we're in the birth canal.
Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's not meant to be simple in the sense of like we're coming up against complex, massively dynamic types of crises, but the simple element in it is where we come from and why, like finding our why as a community, finding our whys as individuals, and that I think the why and the invitation can get people out of that fear matrix of because it gets exponential. Then you find evidence to keep reaffirming the narrative of where something's going. So I think there's a threshold of enough people that see the possibility of a new world, or as Charles Adkins says, the beautiful world we know is possible. That you get past 52% of fear into love, then you can exponentially grow, and you can exponentially start to reaffirm a reality that you'll find the evidence for. So there's this kind of buzzing energy right now where our population of the planet is looking for evidence to reaffirm this reality in one particular outcome, or multiple outcomes that are, say, more on the negative spectrum, and then the population of humanity that's becoming aware and reaffirming this reality and seeing what's possible and evident in collaboration, in connection nature, that is also exponential. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to see more evidence of that. I feel it, and so just one piece coming in right now.
I feel like we've done a really good job of framing, speaking, and tracking this mythology. I'm curious, Denver, if you have something bumbling or bubbling up.
we're having bumbling moments.
I'd just like to chime in on this this unconscious energy of fear. I think there's an awakening that is occurring in a lot of areas that have not happened before, in areas of capitalism, in areas of communism, of oppression. And I think it's accelerated by things like the internet, through social media, through these other wisdom, ancient traditions becoming more commonality now. Not having such a tyranny over ideas and thoughts, but allowing sort of this divine wisdom that's tied to sort of the root of the earth, of sort of this creative energy that is not rooted in scarcity, but in this abundance of creation and this divine sort of wisdom that is allowed to unfold, which I think fear and anxiety can constrict and restrain. But as you said, we drop into this sort of vibration that allows this consciousness to sort of unfold. It has this divine wisdom that will allow to happen regardless. So I think it's having a little bit of faith in this sort of vibration to go, and not constraining or being afraid of it, but actually allowing and grabbing the bulls by the horn and sort of embracing it.
Well said.
Yeah, I feel like your perspective is really powerful right now, and like in context of like you've journeyed out of more of a mainstream capital focused empire into contributing to this new emergent paradigm. So it's kind of cool that you're sealing up this narrative somewhat as someone who's transitioned out of the old model and essentially is here to contribute to the new. I feel your embodied wisdom, as you shared just now, like experiencing that in your own journey. And I'm wondering if there's like if there's anything else that you can name to like as like an invitation, or like having experienced that contrast in your own journey.
Yeah, I think there's studies out there like this Millennial Generation is the most tapped in
Damn millennials.
sort of generation that they're trading dollars for impact. They're more aware of some of these social and global issues, maybe by default because of the internet, but you can't turn a cheek away from it. And I think there's this uneasiness that's going on in some of the established structures that just inherently don't feel right. There's a growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. And there are structures in place that are amplifying that. And so I think people are starting to awaken to the unevenness of it and the anxiety that that's causing. So out there's this growing thought that we need to evolve our consciousness and tap into what else is going on out there that allow us to create sort of an environment that allows you to bring your gifts, that allows you to bring your diverse aspects of you, but to live in this collective sort of community that allows you to create sort of a powerful thing, versus a world where you oppress and you use fear to keep you glued in and tuned out. So I strongly believe that awakening from any dream or sleep can happen regardless of the environment, and I think it's happening all over in different places.
Yeah, I one of the things I track in the fear conversation is its actual necessity in some ways, because we, as humans, are wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure, essentially. And we therefore are always tracking both sides of that coin. And so now, how do we do this in a way on a, let's say, on a villain/hero level? This is the kind of the mythology I like to use just to explain this, in which we are reinventing who the villain is or what the villain is, and not necessarily pointing fingers so much as like, oh, it's this thing, or it's communism, or capitalism, or all the things, right? One person or one thing, or one side, or the left side, or the right side, or whatever it is. Rather than point at those different pieces, the villain now becomes our lack of awareness, our fear. So now these are
self-responsible.
Yeah, so now they're common villains that we all feel.
Right.
And if we have common villains, then therefore we have common heroes, and then we can rally around and cluster in the same way the Imaginal Cells do to fight the villain that is fighting them, that is attacking them. So it's important that the battle is won or lost, or someone or some force is going to lose for this new thing to win. And that's okay if the thing that's losing is this common problem that is really really a tragedy of the commons, right? The tragedy of the commons that we experience is part of what we're experiencing today. And then how do we solve that is by making the tragedy of the commons have the same villain, the same type of villain that is kind of affecting many of us, and transcending that villain as much as possible.
I'm reminded of like the Hunger Games quote, which is one of my mantras. And you know, there's a higher pattern here where there is no enemy, because it's a non-zero sum game.
Sure.
Shout out to Buckminster Fuller. And you know, in the Hunger Games, Katniss's mentor is like, you need to remember who the true enemy is. Like, and that's like, you like level past, like, it's not Exxon, it's not capitalism. No. It's not even, you know, this like force that wants to propagate fear. Like, it's even beyond that. And like, if we can all unite and feel into this, which is like the lower parts of the human experience are being composted and invited into a new pattern, that the real enemy is lives inside. And it's not, you're not going to war against an existing system. Like the Imaginal Cells are alchemizing to create the new one
internally, so that it's fully alchemized. And I want to throw one more piece into the pot as we wind down of that that commitment to self-responsibility of doing that internal work of, resolving the quote-unquote villain within, or taking full self-responsibility for one's experience within, then that that outward-facing blame, or that outward-facing, finding the source of whatever that is, that's actually there to draw out what was hidden inside, right? That mirror of life. So what's cool about this, and what's cool within the varying industries that are represented here, and the varying players and influencers, there's something epic around discovering new models, or having even internal revelation or insight, because it gets seeded into the collective consciousness. So the 13 monkey theory, you have all these islands that are separate. There's no way that these monkeys were able to travel from island to island. One generation discovers if they bury their yams that it's going to last a longer season, teaches it, and then all of a sudden monkeys on the other island start doing it. So this idea that in consciousness, like when there's something introduced to the collective,
not local.
Yeah, it's not localized. So like if you have a massive breakthrough internally that heals fear on some level in your lineage, and now you're no longer outwardly facing and blaming an energy outside of yourself for why you're afraid, but you took responsibility for your own epigenetics in that sense, you're actually seeding that into the collective mind of the possibility of other people doing that. And so this is that critical mass that we're talking about, of like when enough imaginal cells cluster, also in consciousness, when enough people do that internal work, they're seeding it for and inviting it and actually making it easier for the next generations, and easier for others to pop into that pattern and find that awakening quicker. I've seen more people that I didn't ever think would be interested in things that I've been exploring for over a decade, like getting it at such a high level, like a year in. For example, so
there's a compression happening, like a quantum leap is available in humanity because of all timelines collapsing in on, we have all the tools, we have godlike technology, we're cleaning out old systems, and the singularity isn't like being absorbed into artificial intelligence or going to Mars. It's reconnecting ancient wisdom with modern technology and establishing the feed-forward loop in like a regenerative way. And like that engine is under construction. It's under construction in this conversation, this room, and the various threads that have led us all here. And I want to invite us to seal the container, unless there's one more hot burning take.
This guy could bring something in anytime you ask him.
I've never seen Marc not drop into a flow state around narrating, but This has been a very potent conversation, and I'd love to own once with you all to ripple this out and let it live that way. So let's exhale first. Big inhale. Well, family, thank you so much for listening. This has been a little council here at Star House up in Boulder, Colorado. One more time, Marc, Angelo, Coppola, Alokananda, aka Luke, Kevin Arslan, your host, Garret, Adkins, Denver, Wynn. We'll have them all tagged up in the notes, in the comments. Love you all so much. For those family joining on Facebook, if this has been beneficial, epic for you in this dark lighting, this ominous lighting, tag somebody who can vibe with it and share it out to your tribe, because we're creating this myth right